I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. Amen. Alpha, it's over to you.
Well, just before I get into the interview with Jim, I would like to just say that this is the first in a series of special testimony evenings. And as you leave this evening, you will get an invitation to our next one, which will be the first Sunday night in November, when our guest that evening will be Mr. Brian Galt. Brian Galt was one of the survivors of the thalidomide drug and was born without arms. So you get an invitation to that this evening, so make that a date for your diary and come along on that evening. Now Jim and I go back a long way. We've known each other for a long number of years. I think when we met, our beards were black. So I had considerably more hair than I have now. But for the benefit of our congregation here, we may not know you. You can tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, etc.
Well, may I first of all apologise for sitting down. It's just the difficulty that I have is that I really, in a sense, need to move about, and sitting is very difficult. So I've sort of prepared myself so that I can sit here and be interviewed. And my name is Jim Murdoch. It's a long time since I was in this church. I remember doing a mission Sunday here and enjoying that. And I remember driving from Dublin to here, and I was driving across country at one point to here, and someone finally stopped me, waved me down, and asked me why was I driving in the heart of County Down with a Dublin registration car. So it was in the heart of the Troubles, and I explained to them that I was actually on my way to Cumber Baptist to talk about God, so they were quite surprised. But it's a joy to be here. I grew up in East Belfast. The Donald was the kind of place that you went to meet with friends, and Cumber was somewhere that occasionally we cycled to. I'm married to Eleanor, who's with me tonight, and we have 3 daughters, and we now have 3 son-in-laws, and we now have 11 grandchildren, and 9 of those are daughters, and 2 are boys, and 2 boys are in Dublin. I grew up with sisters, so I tend to know as much about women's fashions as I do about anything else. And I came to know the Lord 52 years ago in August at the Bangor World Missionary Convention when I was 16 and a half. And I came to know the Lord because I was determined that I was not going to go to another meeting connected with the Bangor World Missionary Convention. My parents had arranged a week's holiday so that they could go to those activities. And I was determined that on Sunday afternoon I was definitely not going to be at a meeting. I had been at one that morning, and I knew would be at one that evening, and there was a youth service afterwards, so that sounded like a third one. So I was determined that I was going to miss the afternoon one. And yet I found myself at where Picky Pool was, where the Swans are in Bangor. And in those days you would have had something about somewhere between 700 to 800 people who would have gathered on a Sunday afternoon to listen to missionary reports given in the open air. And so I found myself mixing with the crowd. There were people there who assumed that because I was brought up in a Christian home, that I too was a Christian. The one attractive thing that day was that there were two young, very pretty girls on the platform. And when you're 16 and a half and you see two girls not much older, at least it makes going to church, whether it's inside or outside, a bit more reasonable. And then one of these girls shared how that she had, in the summertime, been working in Monaghan and Cavan, and she'd been talking to people to whom the Bible was really not very well known. And I remember just standing there, absolutely stunned, because I had cousins who were missionaries in Africa. We supported friends who were missionaries in India. A former teacher was a missionary in Egypt. And here she was talking about people who lived just a couple of hours down the road. And then as I thought on that, as she was talking, I remember very clearly realizing that I had never accepted Jesus Christ as my Saviour. I never thanked Him for coming to earth to live for me a perfect life and to die in my place instead. And I asked Him to forgive me. And I asked Him that I might one day tell people about Him. And so the Lord very graciously saved me and very graciously called me that day to find a way of preparing myself for ministry. That was to lead eventually to the Irish Baptist College in 1967. Eleanor and I were going together, and then we discovered that if you weren't engaged to be married before you went into the college, you weren't allowed to get married until you finished college. Eleanor, in the province of God, was an orphan, and so she was living on her own, and her dad wasn't there to say no to me. So I asked her would she marry me, and we decided that it would be cheap for us to live together. She agreed to starve, so that two could live as cheaply as one. And so we married, and I went to college, and Eleanor went out to work to keep me there. I remember my first Christmas, the job that I was to do fell through, and so I ended up spending the Christmas holiday, just doing some walking up the end of the street and buying the food for the evening, preparing that meal. And then one day an elderly gentleman approached me and he said to me, "That young wife of yours is a hardy wee woman. Why are you not working?" So the whole street was looking after my Eleanor. But that's 47 years ago, and we're just amazed at what God has done for us. Over those years, I've served God as a missionary with Baptist Missions for 14 years, 1970 to 76, working out of Dublin and across the Republic. And then I came to Craigavon, Centre Craigavon, as their first pastor, and saw the church established there. And then we went back to Dublin to work in Dublin, Pittsburgh Church, which is now Jamestown Road. That's when I met Alfie. And then into Baptist Missions, 1982 to 88. And the work that I did then was travelling across the country, helping to develop small groups that were coming into being under God. And then in the middle of all that, things went wrong. But I eventually, after some years, came to Finicky Baptist Church, and then found myself unable to work. And then God incredibly invited me into the Baptist College through the care of the college, and that's why I eventually was the teach steward, and I continue to be involved with the college up to this time. I'm now the granddad there. That's about it, I think.
Would you like to go into some details, Jim, about your particular health problems?
I noticed that the sign says live with pain. Eleanor always says to please make sure that's not her. Okay? I live with a loving wife, and maybe she's the one who has to live with the pain. But the reality is that I've been in hospital from my point of view too often. When I was a child, I inherited a genetic disorder from my grandmother. It had passed everybody else and came to me, and it was discovered that I couldn't put my right heel to the ground, and by the time it was discovered my toes were badly twisted, and so I had operations every year and a half between the age of 2 and the age of almost 22. And And in those days there were no physiotherapists, and so they just did an operation, put your whole leg in plaster for several weeks, and so with the result, one of my legs is slightly wasted. The reason why I tell you that is that that was to have a bearing whenever I had a car accident. Between 1982 and 88, as I travelled across the Republic, I was doing about an average of 25 to 29,000 miles a year. And one day I was leaving, the 12th of December 1983, I was leaving Dublin to come to Belfast to see some people and also to see the mission committee that night to discuss where the work was going, where my work was going. And I woke that morning to discover that there had been a very heavy frost, that there was warnings of black ice. In those days the Republic didn't grit the roads, they didn't put salt down. It was decided that salt would actually destroy the cars, and so the roads weren't gridded, and it was left to drivers to drive carefully. It took me an hour to cross from Dunleary, near Dunleary where we lived, to Finglas, and I remember actually thinking that I wouldn't go the airport road to Belfast, but I would go the Slane road, or the road to Derry eventually, thinking that on the country road I would have less traffic to face and there would be grass verges if I got into difficulty. I got to a place called Finglas, and the car in front of me accelerated away, and all we like sheep are led astray, and that's true of our lives in terms of sin. It was true that morning of me in terms of driving. I decided that if he got away, maybe I can get away, so I accelerated from 25 to about 32 miles an hour, lost the car with a front wheel drive, and realised that I was in a mighty spin. So I did what every good driver does. I let the car have her head, and then I saw this bearded man coming at me and screaming at me to get out of his road, and making all kinds of movements while he tried to hold onto his steering wheel. And in the end, I suppose, preservation took over. I can remember just calling out, "God, look after me," and I pulled left. He pulled right and got away. I pulled left, hit a green, the car skidded across the grass and into what I thought was a hedge, but the hedge was a granite wall. It was covering a granite wall. The car came off that, most of the car came in around me. The women will laugh at this. I did the man thing. I realised there was no blood and no bruise on me, and so my whole concern was about the car. So I got the car, looked after, told just to recover, and eventually it was repaired, and I never went near a doctor. Over the following number of months, I would have sometimes said to Eleanor, "I really should have sold the car. It's not very comfortable for driving at times." And when I was going to Cork, I would have found myself getting out at some point and just going for a walk and getting back in the car and driving on, totally unaware of the fact that I had serious damage to my spine. Then, around Christmas '84, there was heavy flu in Dublin, heavy flu epidemic, and I was working in the garden and somebody called me, and I turned to speak to them, and this terrible pain shot down my left leg. And I remember over Christmas saying to her, "I've got this flu epidemic." But after Christmas, Eleanor said, "Look, you've done something wrong, you better go and see an osteopath." So I went to see an osteopath, and he said to me, "You need to see a surgeon. Have you been in an accident?" And I said, "Yes, a year ago." He said, "I wouldn't put a hand on you, your back is in serious trouble." So it's hard to believe that I would have gone through a year and no pain. So that's why I say, if you have an accident, go and see a doctor. So eventually, I was waiting to see a surgeon, and then I had had an appointment for over 2 years to come to the Connie Church near Ballygolly to help them with a mission. And Eleanor pleaded with me not to go. My GP ordered me not to go. The physiotherapist who was giving me some physio was so angry with me, and I actually had to take her a bunch of flowers to apologise to her. But I still foolishly went. I say foolishly because it was in the diary. And I thought, I can't let this church down. I've agreed to go 2 years ago. And I said, look, I'll go up a train and someone will collect me in Portadown. And one night, not very long into the mission, that I really shouldn't have been at, we prayed and folks went out of the vestry. I went to pick up my Bible and I hit the floor. And I ended up throwing hymn books at the door until somebody realised that the speaker was very late in coming out. And I found myself in the Gannon Hospital. And that was eventually to lead to 5 major spinal operations. One of them was 8 hours, one was 10 hours. And from 1987 I've lived with lack of mobility, and I've lived with chronic pain from 1987. And yet, I'm not supposed to be able to walk. I was told that I was to go home at one point and get a bed downstairs, give up work, and be on Valium and painkillers for the rest of my life. And I remember breaking into tears and saying, I can't live like that, I'm 42 years of age. And they said, well, unless a neurosurgeon will do something. But the orthopedic surgeon, Mr. Ian Adair, who's now retired, Ian Adair said, I would like to see Mr. Tom Fannin, but I haven't been speaking to him except on the phone for about 7 weeks, but I'll try and see can I find him. And I went to the little phone that was on the ward, put some 10p's in it, rang a friend and asked his friend, because I couldn't contact Eleanor that day, and I rang his friend and said, would you please pray that this man might be fine? Put his phone down and the voice said, are you Jim Murdoch? I said, yes. Would you mind going online in the bed? My name is Tom Fannin. And Ian Adair had walked out of the ward and literally bumped into Tom Fannin, who he hadn't seen for those 7 weeks. Mr. Fannin said to me after a few minutes, can you not feel that? And I said, feel what? He said, I've been working with your left foot. And I hadn't felt that at all. So he took me to surgery, and one surgery, which he expected to last for half an hour, lasted for several hours. And eventually there were 3 more surgeries, one of those 10 hours, 4 more surgeries. So, 5 surgeries, 5 surgeries altogether, 2 with orthopedics and then 3 with neurosurgeons. And then from 1987, I've lived with chronic pain. Sorry, that's too much detail, I'm sure.
In those times, Jim, the difficult times, did you find it difficult to trust God? And did you ever question, where's God when it's hurt so much?
The simple straight answer to that is yes. Not so much where is God, but why doesn't God do something about this? It seems such a waste of energy, such a waste of time. It seems such a waste of resources. I cannot ever thank God enough for the care of the Royal Victoria Hospital and Musgrave Park Hospital. I can't give God thanks enough for the skills that He gave to the orthopedic surgeons, the neurosurgical team, to the physiotherapists. We used to call them physioterrorists. I say to physiotherapist friends, we call you physioterrorists because everybody else is trying to make us comfortable. You're trying to make us as uncomfortable as possible. But if it wasn't for physiotherapists, I wouldn't be able to mobilise. And to occupational therapists, and to one in particular, Marlene Law, who was working with people with brain damage, I found myself in that ward because the ward that I was in, the orthopedic ward was being, neurological ward was being renovated, and I was put into the small side ward. I was the only person in the ward who didn't have brain damage. And Marlene would sometimes just talk to me for the sheer relief of having someone who could have a conversation with her. She discovered that I was a believer, and I discovered she was too. And we often fellowship together. And later on, she was to approach me when she saw me waiting one day and realised that I was having incredible difficulty just getting from here to about where that front seat is. And she offered to do pain management with me. But my problem, Alfie, really was that I had known the Lord since I was 16. I had preached about the Lord in Ireland and across the water. I believed in a God who's sovereign. I believed in a God who is deeply and intimately interested in us. I didn't know you were going to read Psalm 121, but it's a psalm that we call our psalm. There was a time when I was preaching on it, and I was preaching on how that Psalm 121 talks about God being our helper, God being our keeper, God being our preserver. And I remember as I talked about that psalm that morning in Grosvenor Road Baptist Church, somewhere in the back of my head, I can remember distinctly thinking, will you believe this tomorrow morning, Jim? And on Monday morning then we went to the clinic, and the phone rang about an hour later, and it was Eleanor to say that the baby in her womb had died. And we went through 10 days where she had to carry that baby because it wasn't possible for the baby to be removed from her. And we went through those 10 days proving God. And so I knew God could step in. I remember not very long after being in Dublin, holding a 17-year-old lad in my arms when he died from a heroin overdose. And I remember talking to a young man down off the roof of what is Brown Thomas store in Dublin. I had talked to people across the country. I remember a man of 83 standing in tears in County Galway. As a young man said to me, will you go away and let us sell these horses and cattle and stop annoying us with your speaking? And this 83-year-old man turned around and said to him, will you just shut up? He said, I'm 83 and no one has ever told me that Jesus Christ died to save me. I want to hear what this young fellow is saying. I was young in those days. And it was a joy to talk to that man and to answer his questions there as he threw them at me, fast and furious. And as he said to me, you get nothing for nothing, and you're telling me I can be sure of going to heaven for nothing? And I said, well, not for nothing, but because the Lord Jesus Christ came and lived a perfect life, satisfied God, and then died, and was actually abandoned by God for you and for me. He paid the price for our sin, and therefore I can have forgiveness when I thanked him for doing that, and you can have that forgiveness. And there in front of the crowd, he just took the cap off his head, bowed his head, and he looked at me and he said, my heart is full of joy. I have known that God preached such a message. I've seen God transform lives. And then I lay in the Gallon Hospital in terrible pain, not knowing what was wrong with me, wondering how it was that I was 73 miles from Eleanor, wondering what was going to happen. I remember one Sunday, the IRA very kindly blew up a theatre in Musgrave Park, which put all the surgeries back for several weeks. And I was being in Dungannon within 2 weeks, and it took 7 weeks. And the folks in the Dungannon church were very good, and the Connie had come in and bringing me lovely goodies, but I was in terrible pain. And no one quite knew how to help me. I remember I was in traction. That means being strapped to the bed, having weights hanging from you. They were only taken off once a week to wheel me out to the bathroom. And I remember one night, late at night, lying and suddenly thinking, Jim, are you going to trust God? Somewhere in your heart there's always been the thought of something goes wrong at home. I can get there. I can get there by car, I can get there by train, or if I cross the water I can get by plane. But at this moment I can't even move in this bed. Can I actually trust God with my Eleanor, my children? Do you believe in a God like that? I did. I could pray to that God for other people, but suddenly I found that I couldn't pray to him for myself.
suddenly find that I had this great doubt. Had I offended God in some way? And I remember reading that in Hebrew. I knew Hebrews 11, and I knew Hebrews 12. And Hebrews 11 talks about those who prove God by faith. But Hebrews 12 talks about God testing his children. And I remember saying, Lord, are you disciplining me? Lord, will you show me if there's sin in my life? And we are sinners. And if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, you're a sinner and you need God's forgiveness. But I want you to know that those of us who are Christians don't think of ourselves as holier than others. We are sinners too. The only difference is that grace covers our sin. And I remember saying, Lord, search me, show me if there's something wrong. I remember asking for forgiveness for my spiritual pride that had led me to feel that I couldn't ring the Connie and say, look, there's something wrong and I'm waiting to see a surgeon. Can someone else preach? That was spiritual pride. That wasn't the fault of the Connie church, it was my fault. I repented of that. I asked God to forgive me if in any way I ever sinned against him. And I asked him to heal me. Joni Eareckson Tada had been paralysed when she was 17. And she was not Joni Eareckson then. She had dived into a place where she often dived into, and she had hit a rock. And she had discovered that God was sovereign. And she had learned to discover that God was bigger than she thought he was. And she discovered the wonder of knowing him. And if ever you've never heard about her, a book was written just a couple of years ago called The God I Love, where she looks back over many years of proving God as a quadriplegic. But Joni Eareckson discovered God's sovereignty. I had preached God's sovereignty. And I think I found myself like Job. Job said, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord, and then began to ask the questions. And I was asking questions. And as each operation followed each operation, and each time I was being told this will finally solve the problem, each time the surgeon would come and say, within days, we're sorry, but this is not the answer. Then the time came when we were invited to Finicky Baptist Church because the guys in the Royal said, is there any possibility of you coming north, not having to drive, being supported by a church rather than the work you're doing? And Baptist Missions had reached the point where they felt that I couldn't do the work I was doing, and so they felt that they should let me go. And Finicky Baptist Church invited us to come and work with them, because Finicky, where when I was a boy, the Orangemen always went to the field of Finicky, is now one of the largest Catholic parishes in Ireland. And the Baptist Church simply wanted to be a church that could reach out to the community around them. And they therefore asked me, as somebody who lived in areas where most of my friends and neighbours were from a Catholic background. And they simply said, look, we don't need your body, we need your understanding of people from a Catholic tradition so that we might be able to share the gospel with that community. And so they provided a home for us. But it meant for us leaving our two older girls in Dublin. Lorraine had just gone into college. Jeanette was finishing her schooling. And we came north, and Alison at 13 went into Lagard College. And then I had a reasonable year, and then they invited me to stay on as their pastor. I went to the Royal and I asked the Royal if they would do a scan, and depending on the results of that scan, if they said I could work, I would say yes. If not, I would leave. They did a scan and they said, look, we reckon that if you're not driving very much, you're living locally, you're working locally, you have medication and you have physiotherapy, you should have 10 years of active work at least, probably 15. And I said yes. And just a few months after that, more of my back degenerated. And 1989, I reached rock bottom. Do you want me to say anything about rock bottom?
We'll take a break just there to come back to that. We'll take ahead. We'll take number 1077. Give us a break.
And I walked. You don't mind. If I could read something here, because I was asked if I would, in 1990, write some of my thoughts. No area of my life is unaffected by this pain, and I find it difficult to measure the loss of quality in order of greater or lesser importance. However, here goes. Loss of freedom, independence, loss of settled peace and contentment, loss of confidence. Will I be able to do this? Will doing this hurt me more? Will I be able to keep this appointment? If I do have to break this appointment, will I have the confidence to make another appointment with someone? If I work today, will tomorrow be a whiteout because of pain? The pain is spelled there with capital letters. I hate these feelings of self-pity, but they're at the door each day. I hate asking why me, but I do. I have feelings of guilt. I wonder what this is really doing to my Eleanor, to my children, to my friends, to my work, to my church here at Finnegan. I'm afraid. How will I cope today, tomorrow, next week? What if I have to give up work entirely? How will we manage to live? How will I find life to have any meaning anymore? Am I going to be very old before my time? My deepest fear is that I will cease to trust you. I will cease to trust you as my Heavenly Father. Added to that is my fear that if I cease to trust God, that my loss of faith will hurt others. I'm afraid for my Eleanor. I'm afraid for Finnegan Church that it will suffer because of my being here as pastor and not fulfilling that role. I'm grateful for the medication, but I know that the side effects are affecting me. I guess underneath it all, I'm afraid of being useless. There are things that I miss. The freedom to attend worship services, the freedom to go walking, the freedom to go driving just in the countryside with Ellen and the girls on a day off, the freedom to plan holidays without worrying about travel and the pain, sleeping arrangements and the pain, cancellation of the holiday because of the pain, freedom to visit friends or people in general without worrying about the pain and its effect on my relationship with them. I seem to have lost my calmness and it's been replaced with so much tension. I get so irritable and cross at times. I long to be able to go into my study and work solidly at my desk. I long to just read and study with a degree of concentration. I long to be able to do as I once did, to listen to others, to help and counsel without finding my pain increasing until I begin to resent the very person that I long to help. I want to be able to preach without having to think more of my physical and mental comfort. There are things that I'm grateful for. Eleanor's love and support, the love and the cheerfulness of the girls, their willingness to adapt to major changes in home life for my sake, the help and support of many good friends in Ireland and abroad, especially in Dublin and Finicky, the encouragement I received from others who are struggling with problems. And I do know, that God does know, that He does love, He does care. After all, if He doesn't, last November I would have died. Medical skill in the care of the RVH staff, my own GPs, the awareness that the little things in life really matter. I'm glad that I was challenged by Marlene Law, the occupational therapist doing pain management with me, to write that. Because you see, in November '89, I really did think that life wasn't worth living. How does anybody live with 24 hours of pain? How do you live whenever you stand and the pain shoots? You sit down and the pain shoots. How do you cope when you walk and the pain is like fire? How do you do when you lie down and then you discover that if you want to change your position, that suddenly there's pain where you didn't expect it to be? How do you cope with the fact that the drugs you're on that deal with the pain are making it impossible to even read? How do you cope with the fact that the drugs that are there to settle the pain are tearing your stomach to pieces? How do you cope with the fact that each test is followed by another test, and that the drugs for the pain have now torn the lining of my stomach, and I'm going to have difficulties for the rest of my life? How do I cope with the fact that they've discovered that my lung is damaged because the pain that I thought was just in my back was actually my lung, and so my lung is now scarred? God, what are you doing? And then I remember thinking, how would it be if instead of them trying to solve the pain, if I simply removed the pain from them? If instead of Eleanor having to help me to walk from the bedroom to the bathroom, instead of Eleanor having to help me to dress and undress, instead of Eleanor having to waken in the night to massage my back to ease the pain, if I wasn't here, if I simply took more of these drugs and just slipped away, surely that would be the kindest thing to Eleanor. Surely that would be the kindest thing to my children. We'd be able to remember their dad when he was fun and laughter, when he was a husband and a father. To my church, who would be able to be pastored by someone else and led by someone else and encouraged by someone else, instead of having to carry their pastor. Surely it would be better if I simply solved the anxiety for the doctors who have to look at me and say, we're sorry, but that isn't working. Let's try something else. I suppose without realizing that I was talking about euthanasia. I was talking about what is now talked of as assisted suicide. Only I was talking about how do I commit suicide in the simplest way for Eleanor. And then I remembered Bill. I remember talking Bill down of that Brian Thomas's store. I didn't know him. The guards had come to the house and the guards had simply said to me in the early hours of the morning, do you know Bill so-and-so? And I said, no. Well, he wants to talk to you. And I said, where is he? Down in the barracks? He said, no, he's on top of a roof in the centre of Dublin. And he's threatening to throw himself off unless you come to talk to him. Turned out that I'd spoken to Bill in St. Stephen's Green, and I'd given him a tract, and he had my card in his pocket, and he said, "Get Jim Murdoch," and he read the number out to them, and they found me. And Bill came down, and I used to meet him every Tuesday, over 18 months, and we spent Tuesday and we spent part of the weekend together. And then one night, just when I thought that Bill was close to accepting Jesus, he took paraquat poisoning and died. And I remember holding his dad, and Bill was as tall as me and his dad was quite small. He said to me, "I've lost my son, I'll never see him again." And I'm holding his dad and I'm saying, he was a good friend, I'll never forget him. And I remember saying, "Lord, I told Bill to trust Christ. You've got to help me, Lord. You've got to deal with this. You've got to take this lie away from me, Lord." And I reached out for my Bible, and Elmer had been reading Matthew's Gospel to me. And I reached out and I opened it and I found my way to Matthew 10, and I could hardly see because the drugs I was on were making reading very difficult. And I found my way down to Matthew 10 and verse 30, and I read again those words, "The hairs of your head are numbered." And I've loads of them. But what if you were bald? Does that verse have no relevance to you? Well, of course, it's an illustration of God saying, "You can't even count the hairs on your head. I know how many there are." And I said, "Lord, you know me. You know why you're allowing this. Lord, you're going to have to help me to trust you." Pastor Roy McMullen was acting as a pastor to us. And as I called Eleanor in, and as I tried to tell her, through tears, what I just told you, the doorbell rang, and it was Roy. And Roy said, "I just felt I had to come. Is something wrong?" And I told him. And for quite a long time, Roy was the only person outside of Eleanor who knew that. Who knew how rock bottom I had reached. And then when the time came in 1993, when further damage to my back occurred, and I realised that I would have to leave Finicky Church, because I could no longer be in a situation of caring for people, they surprised us with a farewell evening. And as I looked down and I saw people from across Ireland there, and across the years there, I thought, "Lord, if I don't tell these people, I'll never have the courage to tell anybody that I was close to taking my own life." And I shared it. And there were people who were shocked. How could a pastor reach such a position? And then I received a letter from a person who shouldn't have been there, but was there because she was with friends. They said, "Our pastor's having to retire on health grounds. We have to go to the gallery. You've got to come with us." And she wrote to me and she said, "You've given me the courage to tell my mission boss that a year ago I thought of taking my own life." And she said, "I found nothing but love and care." You see, the devil attacks us, and suffering distorts. And the devil used the suffering that I was in to make me think that I was useless and worthless. Not long after that, after Eleanor and the girl, Eleanor told me that day that I shared with her, "Look," she said, "I don't mind how many times I have to help you on and off the toilet. I don't mind how many times I have to care for you. I love you." And not long after that, someone in Finicky Church prayed, and someone wrote it down, not knowing what I'm telling you, what I've told you now. They didn't know how bad things were, but they wrote this down because someone prayed it, and the person who prayed something like this: "Lord, thank you for trusting us as a church to give us Jim Murdoch so that we could care for him." And then in 1993, I was out of work. And what a relief. What a relief to be free of caring for others. What a relief of just being able to simply be. And then I met my dad, and he had a walking stick. And I said to him, Dad, why have you got a walking stick? He said, I got one so that you would feel embarrassed with your walking stick. On the way home from Bangor, I thought, my dad's in his 80s. Am I going to live that long? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm now 47 and a half. What am I supposed to do if I live till I'm 87 and a half? And I got my Bible out, and I thought, if I feel frustrated, how did Paul feel when he was fit and able to go? Whenever Festus and Agrippa said, if he hadn't have appealed to Caesar, we would let this man go, did Paul wish he had kept his mouth shut? Or did Paul know absolute peace? And I began to study Paul's life as somebody who was often disabled, not through pain, although he went through pain, but disabled by the will of others who sought to lock him up. And I find tremendous answers. I find God speaking deep into my heart. And I find God reassuring me that he wasn't finished with me. And then I read this incredible verse in Psalm 38, verse 7. In the Authorized Version it is, my loins are diseased within me. And if I'd read it in that, I don't suppose I would have thought very much about it. But in NIV it reads like this: my back is filled with searing pain. There is no health in my body. I am feeble and utterly crushed. I groan in anguish of heart. All my longings lie open before you, O Lord. Did you know what the Bible talked about? My back. Can one not trust such a God? And then the phone rang a few days later. It was John Burney, and John said, Jim, would you come into the college and lecture? I said, John, I don't think so. He said, well, look, we'd like you to come in and do a series of lectures for us. And I said, John, what were the lectures? We'd like you to talk about the life of Paul. So I had to say yes. And that was 1995, and I'm still there. I've done my MA since then, or my Master's of Divinity since then. I teach the students, and I also act as a pastor to them. Principal Hamlin Moore asked me, he said, Jim, would you act as a pastor to the students? I said, no way. I said, I wouldn't know where to begin. And he said, well, look, he said, just would you be there for them? And I said, look, I'll pray about it. A year went by, and Andy Compton, who's down in Middleton, and sometimes would talk to me about the work in the South. Andy said to me, Jim, could I have 5 minutes with you? So I thought it was about that, and I said, yes, surely, Andy. He said, we've been talking together as a student body. We wondered, would you act as a pastor to us? And I said, you've been talking to the principal. Oh, goodness, no. He said, should we have talked to the principal first? So I joked that I'm the only one who can't run up the stairs away from the student. But the reality is that I'm just there to sit down, to listen to somebody who's just concerned about finances. I'm there to listen to somebody who's concerned about the pressure of study. I'm there to listen to somebody who's worried about their wife because there's not enough money coming in to care for both of them. I'm there to help somebody, as I do with all the third years, who are coming towards the end of their training and wondering what God's going to do with them. I'm there to talk to wives and to girlfriends. I had a girl who rang me and said to me, if he doesn't stop reading books on our dates, I'm going to walk away from him. Thankfully, I was able to persuade him that he could leave Calvin aside and actually tell her what she meant to him. And today they're both serving God in ministry. I'm the granddad in the college, and God has been good to me. I help in helping Asian students. Most of them are doctors. And I talk to them about caring for people. I help senior men in Newton Breda, and every 2 months I do a Bible study. God has been pleased to allow this pain. There's no point in me saying that I like it. There's no point in me saying that I wouldn't wish him to take it away. I also know that it's not the pain that other people have. I have my elder. One of our friends this week went to be with God. And his young wife has left. Younger than us, that is. There are people who suffer depression. If I suffer depression, it's because of the pain and the lack of mobility. There are people who suffer depression and it's just a darkness and they can't grasp hold of it, just as you can't grasp hold of smoke. We have 11 grandchildren. There are people who long to have a child and not being able to have one child. There are some people who have had one little child and they've seen that child reared only to be snatched away from them, murdered by someone else, or taken away in some illness. I'm not an expert in pain. Sometimes I have to take a big stick to myself and I have to read Johnny Erickson and I have to realise that Johnny is quadriplegic. I can move my arms and do whatever I want with them. Johnny sometimes says to me, as she writes in one of her writings, "What's your daydream today?" Would it be just to be able to walk? And for me it would be to be able to walk in the morns, or to be able to walk along by Bangor without having to ask for help. For Johnny it would be just to open the fridge door by herself. But I do live with pain. God has a sense of humour. When I was a missionary and doing all those miles, thousands of miles, my cars were never less than 5 years of age when I bought them. I literally used to have to pray that the Lord would keep the car on the road. And then I found myself disabled and leaving work, and I remember saying, I'm just not sure how long or how old it will last, and somebody said, "Could you get a car from DLA?" I said, "What is DLA?" So instead of getting about £200 a month, I get a new car every 3 years. I'm driving a car which I understand would cost £23,000 to buy. It's insured for both of us. It's looked after by the company. And in January I'll get another new one, God willing. That doesn't happen in other parts of the world. It doesn't happen down south. Down south you can get a car if that enables you to get into work. But you have to buy it, but they take all the taxes off it. But I have my car because some of you are gracious enough to pay your taxes. So thanks for that. But I see that as God's sense of humour. My grandchildren see my stairlift as a Disney toy. I see it as something that screams disability. The day it was put in, it was such a relief to get it. We went out for a drive, I came back and I broke into tears. And I said, "Eleanor, why do I need a stairlift?" Our daughter came in, Alison, and I heard Eleanor say to her, "Be careful about your dad." And Alison said, "Dad, I see they got the stairlift in." And I said, "Yes." And she touched it and she said, "Well, they've given you a waterproof one." Which was the right thing to say, right? And I'm so grateful for the friends around the world. Do you know, on one occasion, that occasion in November '89, when I was so ill, we received a letter from Hull. Never been in Hull in my life. And this letter arrived and a lady was writing it and she said, "When I was a girl, I was in school in Dublin and I keep in touch with people there and they'd mentioned you for prayer. And I'm part of a Lydia prayer group. And we meet every Tuesday morning and we're praying for you. I know you're a pastor," she said. "Will you forgive me if I remind you that Jesus is praying for you?" What a joy to realise that God cared enough for us to cause people to pray for us. I discovered that the day of my accident, that a girl had been deeply concerned about me. And I'd actually moved away from her desk at 5 minutes to 10 that morning to pray for me. And at 7 minutes past 10, I was coming off that wall. I can only tell you my story. Some of it I hope hasn't bored you too much. A tiny bit of it might be helpful to some. If I can talk with you more, then I'd be glad to do that. But thank you for your patience. Thank you, Alfie.
Jim, thank you very much for your openness this evening. Just trust that God will continue to use you. Thank you very much.